Hello, everybody.
Hi, Facebook. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. Now,
If
those who are observant,
Yes.
what is different, or rather the same?
I would say nothing is different
From what?
from
Yesterday. It'd be
Monday.
Yes, from the day previous to the one that you're currently in.
Yeah, you caught us, Facebook. We are recording an episode ahead of time. We'll release it tomorrow, Tuesday, today for you. And one of us is out of the office.
I don't know who you're talking about.
And the other one of us doesn't know how to work everything.
That's not true. That's not true.
No, I could probably make my way. I could probably get it out in the internet and we could do this. But we do feel like these studies work a little better with two voices. We've both had the experience of doing it solo, and it's fine. But without being able to actually talk to you, it just feels a little better. It feels a little more lively when we can go back and forth. And so we thought we would pre-record today's study in chapter 19. We hope that's okay with you. Hope you're doing well. And we will be back with you, at least we anticipate being back with you, both here and live, real time, on Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, we're really messing with the sense of timing recently. So, but we're glad that you're here. We are in Proverbs chapter 19, and I have verse 2.
Me too.
Desire without knowledge is not good, and one who moves too hurriedly misses the way.
So we were talking about this actually before we hit record. Michael, you seem to maybe gravitate toward the first half of this proverb.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just a personality thing, Clint. For me, I can sort of be going along just fine contentedly. And this particularly applies to me with stuff. I think there's other areas of my life where it's also true. But then I'll get this idea in my head. I'd really like to have fill in the blank. Maybe an example of that. I'd love to have a drone. We've been working with Drew Dow, who's amazing, and Drew has an awesome drone. So I see that and think, I'd really like to have that thing. But no knowledge of how much it costs or what it takes to run it. Or, for me, that can often lead me down a path that I find myself both unequipped and, quite frankly, trying to fulfill a desire that you can't fulfill. And I think that that's not a mark of wisdom that we're called to here.
Yeah, and this proverb sort of functions for me in two separate thoughts. I mean, they're not, I'm sure they're related, but I feel much more convicted by the second half of the proverb. The one who moves too hurriedly misses the way. And as I hear this and am convicted by it, it's how many times I've lived out the old, ready, fire, aim, jumping into something before paying any attention and missing the way because I was in a hurry, because I didn't take the time to think and didn't take the time to study and went off sort of half-cocked and missed the mark, missed the point. And so it's interesting that the same proverb speaks to us, but different parts of it.
And I wonder if maybe one of the surprising aspects of this proverb is how desire and knowledge are set against each other. And I think it relates to that hurriedness, Clint, because desire is generally a thing that we think of as more emotive. It's more of a gut. Knowledge we think of as a head, a thoughtful, a cerebral kind of thing. The idea that these two should be connected leads us to the problem that we find in being hurried, because you can't just rush through, you can't just run down the path and know your desire and think about it. I mean, that takes time. It takes a sort of commitment and a slow, steady approach to life for you to be able to be connected to your inner desires and allow that knowledge to be something that you actually tap into, that you actually connect with. And so, maybe that's a challenge for those of us that try to run through life and therefore miss those inner desires and that inner wisdom because we're unable to take the time to really plumb it.
Yeah, and it's going beyond the proverb here, but there is that sweet spot, right? There's the risk of running ahead before you're ready, getting out in front and missing the point. There's also the risk of studying too long and missing the window, missing the opportunity. So there is, as in all things wisdom related, that sweet spot in the middle that thinks for the appropriate amount of time and then acts at the right time. And the balance of that is no small feat, and I think one that we continue to work on for most of our lives, probably. I probably fall, if I'm going to miss, I'm always generally going to miss on the side of underthinking, not overthinking.
Yeah, if I'm going to, I'm not even sure that thinking is my word there. My word is desire, and I never know what my desire actually is. I'm I'm a complete riddle to myself. I have to be either told or activate some maturity and sit down and do some real reflection, because my desires are generally not something I'm conscious of.
Interesting. The next one I had, Michael, is verse 11. Those with good sense are slow to anger, and it is their glory to overlook an offense.
Ouch.
Yeah. Slow to anger is something we've seen before. In fact, that's a verbatim quote from the book of James, but it's also been attested to in the Proverbs many times. And it is a glory to overlook an offense. Those are humbling words.
I'm not sure that commentating on that is going to be helpful. That is very much a case of it's easier to say than it is to do. And, I think maybe it may help only to illustrate. This is true in our household right now. I have a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, and there is no overlooking offenses that happens. When you make an infraction, that other sibling is not only going to call you on it, they're going to say it loud enough that mom and dad get involved. And, that just only goes on in life, right? This sort of tick for tack, this kind of rule keeping, score keeping that we do. The person who is able to overlook an offense, that is, if you know those people, as many of us do, it is an amazing thing to watch.
Mm-hmm. So the next one I have is a little bit rough. It's number 13. A foolish child, or some translations say a stupid child, is a ruin to a father, and a wife's quarreling is a continual dripping of rain. Now, it would be easy to, as it's written, take this in a probably sexist way, and I think we have to admit that it's pretty one-sided. But I think in the broader context, Michael, the idea here for me is that the one who is wise, or perhaps the one who is blessed, is also blessed by those they live with. That the experience of strife, the experience of foolishness in one's home is not life-giving. It is soul-battering. And so the encouragement, I think, to young people as I read the Proverbs through that lens is to engage with a spouse and children in such a way that there is joy and there is gratitude and there is life within a home, to make that one's goal. Because when it's missing, all the things in the world won't offset that and won't make up for it.
Yeah, my verse actually, I think, connects with that later on, verse 26. Those who do violence to their father and chase away their mother are children who cause shame and bring reproach. This is another very difficult text, Clint, and I think it's worth saying right at the start, there are some who are blessed with incredibly positive and consistent parent relationships, and for all of those, thanks be to God. But there are also many who have had very troubled relationships with their mother and their father, and these words aren't entirely clear as to what that might mean in that context, but I do think there is something that we need to wrestle with, and that is that even though we have many different stories in our families of origin, it is a great spiritual discipline to try to practice love of neighbor for those who are often the hardest to love. Now, That doesn't mean turning into abuse. It doesn't mean some of the things that we might know as family relationship that we know are outside the bounds of healthy. I mean, that needs to temper it. But Clint, there are those children, and we can all speak to them, who do push away their parents actively, and sometimes for what seems like very little reason. And I think it's worth noting, to whatever extent we have power to honor our father and mother, to bring some sense of decorum in that relationship, we have a duty to do so.
Yeah, and I like the idea, Michael, that wisdom simultaneously calls us to be good sons and daughters and good parents. That we are to exercise wisdom in both of our relationships. If we have good parents, to be thankful and to seek living up to be a good son or daughter, but also as we parent, to parent with wisdom and to be grateful and work to produce kids who stay connected to us. Now, sometimes that's easier said than done, and sometimes at no one's fault that doesn't always work out, but it is the calling incumbent upon us as on both sides of our family relationships to try and let wisdom guide us and lead us in those things. And I think that's helpful. What else do you have?
Verse 16, those who keep the commandment will live. Those who are heedless of their ways will die. For me, this is a theme verse in that I think this is a glimpse into the core of what wisdom is, this belief that God's commandments, the things that God has taught us, are sure, that they are something that you can rely upon, that if you disregard them, they even bring death. That's language that I think in some ways we have underemphasized. I think, for instance, in my confirmation classroom, I have the 10 Commandments on the wall. And unfortunately, they kind of look like they're on old paper with an old stone, and it looks like it was printed 30 years ago. It's sort of unfortunate because it's like the commandments are that old thing you tuck away in the confirmation classroom, and not what I think we see here, how the commandments are timely, they're alive, they are present and with us, and they're good for you, that if you heed them and hear them and learn them and attend to them, that your life will be better off for it. If we treasured them in the way that I think we are encouraged to in the book of Proverbs, we may have different approach and connection to the commandments.
Good. Yeah, very good. So let's talk about the next one, verse 17. I think this is really interestingly stated. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord and will be repaid in full. I find this a fascinating way to phrase this call to care for the poor. We see the call to care for the poor throughout the scripture, but whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord. In other words,
right.
that God is gracious to the poor, and when we participate in it, we are extending credit to God. We are extending blessing to God, and we will be repaid. We are undertaking some of God's work on His behalf, and He is pleased by it. I think this stands out for the way it's uniquely stated here, Michael, and it caught my attention.
It reminds me of the time that Jesus spoke to the disciples and asked, when did you visit me in prison? Very much this idea where God connects to the least, the lost, the poorest. This that you find God in the places where they are suffering, in the lives of those people whose lives are broken. That's where God can be found. And I think we sometimes think of, in ancient times, this would have been part of this would have been called almsgiving. This idea of giving to another. We think of giving as a chore or expectation. Really, if you were to read this in context of the verse that came just before it, the way to real life is to be a person who lives with your hands outstretched and a kind of willingness to care for those who are in need.
Yeah, very good.
Verse 21.
Okay.
The human mind may devise many plans, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will be established. Unfortunately, this can go wrong on both sides of the reading. You can be a person who says, well, God's just going to get God's way, so let's not plan and let's go off half-planned. And you can have people who live destructive lives because they're unwilling to plan because of this. Then you have the other side that says that goes to the opposite extreme and plans everything. And when it doesn't go exactly the way that they intend, there's no flexibility, and the Lord has forsaken me. And there's this sort of moderate path in life that is by definition hard. It's hard to walk in the middle. And there's this beautiful connection between it's good to make plans, and it's good to trust that God's going to carry you throughout the middle of it. In the Reformed tradition, we might call that providence, that God's providential care will be there, even if you planned it that way or didn't plan it that way. But yet, God has a desire that we will use our agency. So I only bring up this verse to point out, I think it's one of those examples that wisdom often brings with it a kind of nuance that we sometimes miss on the edges.
Mm-hmm. One serious one and probably one funny one for me, verse 19, a violent-tempered person will pay the penalty. If you effect a rescue, you will only have to do it again. And if you have ever unfortunately been in a circumstance that is violent or a situation that is violent, there is a cyclical nature to it. It tends to, if you grew up in a home where there was violence, it happens repeatedly. And I think there is deep wisdom here. Again, the idea of speaking to a young person and saying, look, if you have friends, if you surround yourself with people who are violent, you think, Michael, unfortunately, of those, particularly women who have lived in abusive situations, almost never is that a single occurrence. If that happens once, it is almost guaranteed that it's going to happen again. And I think Proverbs was well ahead of its time in recognizing that. And that's not to say that people can't change, and it's not to say there's not the power of forgiveness and going a different way, but it is to say that that is unfortunately the exception to the rule. And then finally, the last one I had, I don't know if Proverbs endeavors to be funny, but there are times I think it maybe seeks some kind of absurdity. Verse 24, the lazy person buries a hand in the dish and will not even bring it back to the mouth. And so just this sort of caricature of the lazy person they're just so lazy they can't even lift their hand with food in it. They've got their hand in the chips, but it's too much work to bring the chips to their mouth and eat it. So that one made me smile, and I thought to myself, well done, Solomon. That's funny.
Well, friends, we've got some great mixture in there today, but hopefully there's something that spoke to you, and we look forward to our next conversation with you tomorrow.
Hey, thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow, and we hope you all are well.
Be blessed. Thank you for spending time with us today as we study Scripture together. If you haven't already, we would invite you to follow us on Facebook or subscribe on YouTube. It's a great way to get notified when these studies happen every day at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. Of course, if you've already done that, we would love for you to be able to give the video a like, to share it if you're on Facebook. This is a great way for other people to find the Bible study and be able to join us in this time studying Scripture. If this is your first time here, welcome. It's such a joy to have you be with us this day, and we would love to get to know you better. We would love if you wouldn't mind just taking a minute to go to our website, fpcspiritlake.org/welcome. We'd love to get your name and email address, and we'll follow up with you personally to thank you for spending time with us this day. And for each and every person that is able to study Scripture and engage in this conversation, we want to say thank you. We look forward to our next time with you every weekday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. And until then, God bless.